Okay, so we're starting with the clavicle. So there's only 4 major structures that you have to be able to identify for the clavicle, and then tell the difference between right and left. Okay? So first of all, you have one end that's very blunt. It's kind of fat, and it ends pretty bluntly. The other end is it's flat, and it flares out. Okay? So the blunt end, oh, by the way, you can look on page 147 in your lab manual. The blunt end is the sternal end, and then the flared, flatter end, this is your acromial end. Okay? Now, if I turn the clavicle over, it's kind of hard to see it. Okay, there we have some shade. On the acromial end, you're going to see there's a bump. It's a pretty pronounced bump. This is inferior, so the bone is upside down right now. So this bump this is the conoid tubercle. Okay, and so the conoid tubercle is closest to the acromial end. And it should be, if it's in correct position, the conoid tubercle should be inferior. Okay. The other structure we're looking for is called the costal tuberosity, and this one it's much smaller, and it's going to be a kind of a rough. Of course, this is a fake bone, so it's harder to find. Okay, little rough edge. So the conoid tubercle, it's going to be on the same side. This little rough edge here, close to the sternal end. That's your costal tuberosity. So it's much smaller, and you're going to have to feel for it. It's just rough, and so it's rough because it's an attachment site for ligaments. Actually, no, tendons. Just kidding. Attachment site for tendons, for a muscle. Okay. Oh, this doesn't work. Okay. Now, if you guys look at the skeletons on either side, how do the clavicles sit? Okay. What do you see? So we know the sternal end is going to be articulating with that clavicular facet of the sternum, right? So, but then we look at the acromial end. How does that fit together? Something's wrong with that. What happened to... Something's wrong. Look at this skeleton. Yeah, his shoulder's messed up. Okay, so does the clavicle... The flare faces out anterior or posterior? Anterior. So, taking that information and the fact that the conoid tubercle needs to be inferior, so I'm putting it facing down, having the clavicle flaring out, and having my sternal end obviously is going to be articulating with my sternum, then I can determine whether I'm holding a right or left clavicle. So for me, I'm holding a right clavicle. Flaring out, conoid tubercle is inferior, and then we have our sternal end right there. Okay, that, to be honest, is probably one of the most challenging bones to do right and left. So don't look at that skeleton. There's something wrong with it. Look at the real one. You'll see the correct placement of the clavicle there. Okay? Oh. All right, so we're going to move to the scapula. This lovely bone here. So the clavicle and the scapula help form what we call the pectoral girdle, okay? Which is all involved with our ability to move our arm, okay? So, we're going to start by just going down the list, and then we'll probably move around a bit. Okay. So, first of all, are you looking at the anterior or posterior view of the scapula? This is the posterior view. If I turn it over, this side is completely smooth. This is anterior. So this sits against your rib cage. Okay? So, okay, pretend your rib cage is here. So it's sitting against there. You have a muscle in here. And this side that has this big spine is posterior. Okay? So the side that's all smooth, this is anterior. Okay? Since we're looking at this nice smooth inner surface, anybody you want to tell me what it's called? Yep, it's a subscapular fossa. Okay, since we're talking about fossas, let's just do the other two fossas. So we're going to look at the posterior view. Okay, so I'm going to put it at an angle so we can see this a little bit better. Here's the whole posterior view. Kind of dividing it, not perfectly in half, but dividing it, we have this big spine, and it's literally called the spine of the scapula. This is the spine. And yes, I'll make a note of that. But the spine divides the posterior side into two fossas. Okay? The superior one, it looks kind of like a taco. See that? Like a taco shell. So in here, this is the supraspinous fossa. It's your taco shell. Okay? And below the spine is your infraspinous fossa. Okay, so supraspinous fossa, it's a taco shell. Bam. It really looks like a taco shell. Okay. Alright, so we've done the fossas, we've done the spine. Let's do this lovely, unique, kind of indented, that's another fossa, kind of oval-shaped structure. What do we call that? The glenoid cavity or fossa. They mean the same thing. Okay, now, would you expect to find, well, first of all, the glenoid cavity or fossa, this is where the head of the humerus is articulating, okay? So this is where your arm is articulating. So where would you expect this to be on your body? Okay, how do I ask this? On your appendicular, right? Can you tell me now, just by knowing anterior and posterior, if you have a right or left scapula? How do you know? Okay, so the smooth side goes against your own back, and then the glenoid fossa should be where the head of the humerus is articulating. So the easiest way is to kind of put it on your body. I'm not kidding. So for me, this is a left scapula. So if this is where the head of the humerus is articulating, what's that area of our body called? Right there. Yeah, the axillary, or I don't know how you said that. Axillary. Yeah, so it's kind of in that armpit region. So we're going over borders. Okay? So the border that drops below the glenoid fossa, that's your axillary border. In your book, what is it called? It calls it your lateral border. Both are correct. I would write the other term into your book. Okay? Axillary. So that's on the same side as the glenoid fossa. If you come up on the other side, this is your vertebral border or your medial border. Same thing. So vertebral border, because this is the side of the scapula it's closest to the vertebra, and it's also most medial. Okay? Then if we continue up, this border, or this top edge, we can even turn it around to see it better, this top edge here, be our superior border. Okay? So if you're following your superior border along, do you find a little notch right there at the end? You should find a little notch at the end of the superior border. That's your scapular notch. Let's see, can't get it. There you go. See, there's our notch. Okay, so on our list we have two structures left, the acromion process and the coracoid process. So if we were looking at our scapular notch, the next thing along, if we're just traveling along, there's our scapular notch, and then keep going, we come across this projection it's kind of thick and fat. It's almost like a finger sticking out. Okay, and if we look at it from the other side, it's coming off of the glenoid fossa. So this projection, what is it? Anybody? It's your coracoid process. The other process, if we follow the spine, so here's our spine, and it flattens out. So it's a nice, look how flat it is. Nice flat process coming off of the spine of the scapula. That's your acromion, or your acromial process. Okay. So those are all of the structures for the scapula, and then including being able to tell right versus left. Okay, so we're going to move to the humerus next. And so next page, page 148. Okay. Try to show as much of this in here as I can. Okay. So, guys, hold up the humerus and point to the head. Okay. Looks like you guys figured it out. Yes. So, the nice rounded portion up here is the head of the humerus. Very good. Good job. Okay. Now, let's see if I can zoom in. Well, that doesn't really help. Okay. Notice along the edge of the head, there's like a very distinct line from where it's smooth and where it gets rough. You follow that line all the way around. Okay. That is the anatomical neck of the humerus. So the humerus has two necks. The second neck is going to be the surgical neck, which is the narrowest part below. So kind of encircling the base. So this would be where the surgical neck is. Anatomical neck is right around the base of the smooth, articulated portion. Okay, and up there by the head, we have two tubercles. We have a greater tubercle and a lesser tubercle. So if we're looking at the head, okay, we see a big bump here. And then, okay, we see, it's this even bigger bump right here. So the bigger bump is our greater tubercle. And notice it's separated by this groove right here. The smaller bump is our lesser tubercle. And guess what we call this little valley in between the tubercles? Yep. The intertubercular groove, which literally means the groove in between the tubercles. Okay? Okay, so there's one more structure. Okay, so we're going to move down the humerus. So take your finger, this is going to help. If you feel down the humerus, there's a rough kind of bumpy portion kind of right in the center. Unfortunately, I can't get the whole bone in the picture. This rough bumpy portion here, it's our deltoid tuberosity. And if you had to guess, what is attaching to the deltoid tuberosity? Yeah, the tendon for the deltoid. Yeah. It's nice that they start naming things for what attaches to them. It's quite nice. Okay, so we're going to go down, all the way down to the distal end of the humerus. Okay. And so, how can you tell anterior versus posterior on the humerus? Okay. Okay, so oh, come on, focus. Okay. Anterior has two little dips, which are the coronoid fossa and the radial fossa. So here's our coronoid fossa. It's a small one, and the radial fossa is like almost non-existent. Okay. If we turn it over, we're going to be able to see a big difference. Bam! There's a big, giant fossa. What's that one called? The olecranon fossa. It's big. Okay? So the big fossa, the olecranon fossa, is on the posterior side. Okay. I'm going to turn our humerus back over anterior side. And we're going to focus on these surface features on the bottom. Okay? So right below the coronoid fossa, yep, we have this smooth surface from this little ridge to this ridge. This whole smooth surface that actually goes all the way to the other side too, up. Okay? That whole surface is the trochlea. Okay? You can rub your finger on it, it's nice and smooth, goes all the way around. It's the trochlea. Then you have this circular part. It's all kind of by itself. This really pretty, almost perfect circle. The capitulum. I don't know if I'm saying it right. Yeah, but the capitulum. So it's nice, almost perfect circle. So the capitulum is one side, and the trochlea is this whole structure here. Okay? Now, if we know, so backing up again, pulling back up to the head, is the head facing medial or lateral? Medial. Okay, medial. So, I'm not going to move the bone other than moving it up and down. So the head is going to be facing medial. So I'm running my finger along the medial side of the bone, coming back down to the distal part. Okay? So we see our trochlea right here. We see our capitulum. We know this is the medial side of the bone. This big, giant bump on the side. This is our medial epicondyle. If this side is medial, then this side with this little bump over here is our lateral. And this little bump is our lateral epicondyle. Okay? And so same thing on the other side. Medial is much bigger, medial epicondyle, and then the little tiny lateral epicondyle. Okay, so how can you tell if the humerus is right or left? You look at the direction that the head is pointing. Only after you determine if you're looking at the anterior or posterior view of the bone. So the best way to do it is kind of hold it up to yourself and figure it out. Which view is anterior? Well, I know that posterior has that big giant olecranon fossa, right? So that's supposed to be pointing back. And then the head should be pointing towards my body. It's medial, right? So it's only going to work on one side. So for me, I'm holding a right humerus. Okay? So make sure, practice with a couple different ones. make sure that you have figured out how to tell the difference between right and left on the humerus. Okay, so we're going to be moving to the ulna. So the ulna is this funny bone with like the Cookie Monster C shape. Okay. Oh, and before we start talking about the structures, real quick, remember our humerus right here? And let's see here. The olecranon fossa. Guess what fits in there? Okay, so we're going to talk about that. So this lovely little sucker runs along right there. Okay. So, ulna, you'll see on page 149. All right. So, first structure we're looking for is the olecranon process. So I'm holding it at a lovely angle. And so, easiest way to see this is we're holding it so we can see the C. This part of the bone and above is the olecranon process. So, the part that's sticking up above my finger. This is, so right here is the olecranon process. The trochlear notch, so if we're going to turn so we can see inside the surface of the ulna, this inside surface should be nice and smooth. It's an articulating surface. This is the trochlear notch. So the trochlear notch articulates with the trochlea of the humerus. Okay, so it makes it a really nice, makes it a really nice hinge joint. So the olecranon process fits into the olecranon fossa. The trochlear notch rotates on the trochlea. Okay, so we get our hinge, and we can't go past that point because the olecranon process sticks there, and it's as far as it goes. Okay. It's kind of cool. All right. So going back to looking at the ulna on this side, so we have our olecranon process. There's our trochlear notch. If we're looking from the side, we have a process that sticks out laterally. What is it called? Yeah, it's the coronoid process. So sticking out, it's your coronoid process. Now we're going to rotate our ulna until we find a nice smooth indentation on the side. It's below the trochlear notch, okay? You're only going to find it on one side of the ulna. And so that is going to be your radial notch of the ulna. So this is where the head of the radius articulates with the ulna. Remember, we talked about in class how those two bones are connected by that membrane. They also rotate around each other. And so having that nice smooth surface is important for the rotation. It's your radial notch of the ulna. Okay, so that's all the structures at this end, or the proximal end of the ulna, that you need to know. If we move all the way down to the distal end, we have two structures we need to know. Interestingly, the head of the ulna is at the distal end, closest to your wrist. So this portion here, where you actually see the 220, this portion, it's nice and smooth. This is the head of the ulna. Okay? And you should see a portion that kind of sticks down below. Some people, like if it's a real bone, it might be kind of spiky. It kind of depends on the bone. This little portion that sticks out, that's the styloid process of the ulna. Because we've used the word styloid process, or the term styloid process before, right? Yep. So we always got to name the bone. So styloid process of the ulna, the head of the ulna, and the head of the ulna is distal, so it's at the wrist, not at the elbow. So how do you tell if you have a right or a left ulna? First clue, okay, we got to think anterior view. that trochlear notch should be facing forward, anteriorly. Okay? Try to imagine it on your own arm. And the ulna ends up on the pinky side of your hand, of your wrist. Okay? And the radius ends up on the thumb side of your wrist. So, remember where that radial notch of the ulna is? Okay? So that kind of gives you a clue of, okay, the radius is going to be on a certain side. And you know the ulna has to end up on your pinky side. Right? So you can take that bone, try to put it on your body and go, all right, I have to have the ulna on the pinky side of my arm, and that radial notch needs to point towards the radius, where the radius should be. Try it on both arms. Does the radial notch match up? Does it? See if you can make it work. So if I try it on this arm, it's kind of hard to see. Okay, so ulna is on that side. Okay, it's on that side of the wrist, but oh, the radial notch is here. I can't put it over here. That won't work. If I put it on this side, okay, it's on the pinky side, and the radial notch is facing towards the radius. So it only works on my left arm. So I'm holding a left ulna. Okay, so that radial notch, and making sure the trochlear notch is facing anterior. Okay, next is the radius. Not too much to know for the radius. Okay? So first of all, why don't you hold up your radius and point to the head? Okay? Hold the radius up and point to the head. Okay, yes, good. Good, yeah, so the head is this, it's flat on top, and it's kind of round all around the sides. It's a really interesting little bone, okay? This is the head of the radius, flat, and then it's round. So just as a reminder, remember that radial notch over here, the ulna? This is where the head, it rotates on that radial notch, okay? So that's why it's smooth all the way around on the radius. Okay, ooh, whoa, okay. Okay. Okay, so if this is the head, then the narrow portion right below it is the neck. That's right. Okay, below the neck, not too far, so like a finger width from the head, down below is this bump. It's your radial tuberosity. Okay, so we have our head, our neck, and then our radial tuberosity. Zoom out so you can see that. Okay, so that's all we need to know for the proximal end of the radius. And we are going to move down to the distal end. I'll just rotate this. So this is the distal end of the radius. You can look at it from both sides, it's fine. So there's two structures we're looking for. We're looking for the ulnar notch. So we're looking for a point of articulation on the radius. So we're looking for something smooth. So on one side of the bone, you're going to find a nice, smooth little indentation. Okay, so I'm sorry, it's not focusing very well. So you should find that pretty well. And the other end of the bone kind of points down from that point. So you have the ulnar notch on one side, and then you have a point on the other side. This point is the styloid process of the radius, and then we have the ulnar notch of the what? Of the radius. Yeah, you have to name the bone, okay? Because if you just say ulnar notch, yeah, you need to name the bone of where you found it.
So on the test, we need to say of the radius? On the quiz, we need to say of the radius?
Yes. Yes. It's kind of like when you named the temporal process of the zygomatic bone. If you just said temporal process, you could assume, oh, it's from the temporal bone. But we need to, because we're naming two different bones. So we need to say, okay, that's the ulnar notch of the radius, just to be super clear. Okay? So, with the radius, how can we tell if we have a right or left radius? Okay, so first of all, we know the ulnar notch should be facing your pinky, right? Well, I know I'm not holding the right one. It should be facing your pinky. And the styloid process is for your wrist. Right. So, for example, like, okay, there's my styloid process. My ulnar notch is facing, oh, I'm in the wrong way. Can I turn it over and do it? Yeah. But what about, there's one other structure you need to look for. The radial tuberosity is it's anterior, okay? So the radial tuberosity should be facing mostly front. The ulnar notch should be facing the pinky side, and that styloid process should be on the thumb side. So I'm going to show you. So I've got the styloid process on my thumb side. There's the ulnar notch facing the pinky side. And if I move up, there's my radial tuberosity sitting out on the anterior side. Now, if we take that bone, the radial tuberosity is still pointing upwards, and we try to do it on the other side, it would work great if it was the ulna, but it doesn't work, okay? So radial tuberosity has to be anterior. Get the styloid process right there on the thumb side, and then make sure your ulnar notch is facing towards your ulna, okay? All right, we're almost done. We have the hand.